Welcome again to our Politics in the Public Mind series, and today I'm delighted that we'll be welcoming Mr. Bianchi, Mr. Robert Bianchi, the Morris County prosecutor. As prosecutor, Mr. Bianchi directs the law enforcement division of the county, and he provides leadership and direction to a wide range of individuals associated with criminal law enforcement, but also associated with the courtroom aspect of his work. As part of his legal responsibilities then, Mr. Bianchi works in the shadow of a somewhat famous depiction of justice, a somewhat famous statue. At least it's famous by sort of local lore standards. And this depiction of justice is a little unusual. It has a she, and this is common. Many of the depictions of the spirit of justice are female. She has a sword in her right hand. She is gold, and she has a set of scales in her left hand. That's not so unusual. The unusual part is that justice lacks a blindfold, leading some in-house commentary. You can correct me if this is true, but I've heard there's an in-house joke that in Morris County, justice is not blind. But as I understand it, this is actually a kind of new idea that justice, the figure of justice, should be covered in a blindfold. In the 16th century, illustrated manuscripts, books, and other depictions of justice would regularly show her as having no blindfold, as being capable of watching over society, being able to implement her vision of justice with clear eyes, and presumably a clear conscience. Blind justice did not become popular as a motif, as an image, until the 16th century, and then it was often depicted in a not wholly positive way, often in a quite negative way. The famous German painter Albrecht Dürer had a picture of justice blindfolded and being led astray by a fool. The implication being if justice were blind, she would be taken advantage of. A somewhat analogous depiction by the Dutch painter Bruegel had justice being surrounded by many instruments of punishment from the state, and she was again blindfolded. And many people interpreted this to mean that justice blindfolded, not able to see, was unaware of the pain inflicted around her by the justice system. Well, during the 17th century, this began to change, and our more contemporary image of a blindfolded justice took root. And that's the common image that we typically associate with this figure, that the state should be outside of law, that the judges and administrators of justice should be blind to considerations of the sovereign, to considerations of politics. Now, I mention all this not only as a way of giving you a chance to finish your last nibble of cookie and drink your last cup of coffee, but also as an attempt to connect today's talk and Mr. Bianchi's work with the themes of the course. So one of the points of our lecture series, one of the points of this Politics on the Public Mind series, which, as Colleen mentioned, takes place every Monday in this room, is that we should think about the connections between law and society. We shouldn't look at law as a brooding presence in the sky, separated from the rest of our social order. That at a minimum, we need to think about how the legitimacy of our courts, the legitimacy of our laws depend upon our acceptance of them and understanding of these laws. Similarly, while Mr. Bianchi's job certainly brings him into the courtroom, or at least brings his attention to the courtroom, I believe he also needs to be attentive to the conditions in the county, the understanding of citizens, the conditions on the streets of our cities and towns. Mr. Bianchi earned his Bachelor of Arts in American Studies and History, good liberal arts fields, very much something we support here at FDU. And he graduated magna cum laude and earned his JD, his law degree, at Seton Hall Law School in 1988. He then served as an assistant prosecutor with Hudson County and the Hudson County's prosecutor's office, and eventually became a law partner in his father, Angelo Bianchi's firm, where he practiced a wide array of law, including such areas as criminal defense, police practice, civil rights, and employment law. After that, Mr. Bianchi was nominated by Governor John Corzine to serve as Morris County Prosecutor. He was confirmed by the State Senate, and he continues to serve in this role as Morris County Prosecutor today. During today's talk, I think we're going to be covering, among other things, we'll be talking about the crime trends in the county. We'll be talking a little bit about the changing face of prosecution in the 21st century, and we will have opportunity during our question and answer phase to explore these and other topics. In the meantime, please join me in welcoming Mr. Robert Bianchi to our series.
Well, good afternoon. Actually, I was just telling the professor when I had an opportunity to mill about before, and excuse me if I cough a little bit because I'm still suffering from a cold for the last 6 months, I think. But we were basically fielding a lot of questions from the students. They're actually really intriguing because they were actually presenting a lot of themes better than I could do in a prepared speech. But I want to just go off on something that Bruce had said. I find this job to be a fascinating one as far as being a prosecutor. I think it's one of the most, in my opinion, honorable professions if it is cradled and taken care of in a way and in a manner which respects the power and authority that is given to it and actually constantly focuses on the primary mission of what it is that a prosecutor does. And there are typically a lot of misunderstandings about what it is that a prosecutor does do, but we are involved in so many different facets of the community that I think you would find it quite interesting. In our own office, we have so many divisions. In the prosecutor's office in Morris County alone, the Homeland Security Division, the Family Division, which deals with juvenile crimes and acts of domestic violence. When we have a division that deals with major crimes, anything from a homicide that would occur, burglaries that occur, armed robberies that would occur, rapes that would occur, all these units are working together. We have units that deal with trial prosecutions alone, so all the other kinds of cases that wind up going into the courtroom, those detectives and assistant prosecutors would be handling those matters. And we're involved in essentially getting out into the community in a very, very prolific way, which I'm going to talk to you about in a couple of minutes, because I do agree that people have to understand what it is that we do. And I do agree, at the prosecutor's office, because of the unbelievable amount of power and authority that is given to the prosecutor and to the assistant prosecutors and the detectives to actually take the liberty of a person and to actually prosecute that person and put them into jail needs to be jealously guarded, needs to be done in a correct fashion, not only so that we do the right thing or get to the right place, but that the community can have confidence that we are doing our job in terms of, one, protecting the community, but also applying those constitutional protections to make sure we don't become so authoritative that the very reason why the Founding Fathers created the Constitution in the first place would have become usurped. So there's a lot of competing interests that occur with regard to what it is we do. Some people may find it unseemly and very, wow, that's complex. It's not an area I'd want to get into. But I like to thrive in that environment because I feel that it constantly challenges you to look at each case and each crime problem in the county as an individualized case or an individualized problem. In other words, that you don't have cookie-cutter justice. And I often tell my attorneys and detectives that this is not a criminal claims adjusting place. This is not a place where we just push paper from one side of a corner of a desk to another side and we put defendants in and out of the system without any real intense look at what it is that we are doing. What are we accomplishing? What are the goals? What is the focus? What is the vision? And are we protecting the community in doing what it is that we're doing rather than merely warehousing people in an incarceration setting? And while on the same token, I think that we've established a reputation in the Morris County Prosecutor's Office as being a very aggressive and effective law enforcement agency, but by the same token, balancing those constitutional protections so that we make sure that those individuals who can be rehabilitated, those individuals who can be repatriated back into society in a dynamic way, that we take that opportunity to give them that chance. And sometimes that may sound obvious to you, may sound like a punchline, but when you're dealing with assistant prosecutors that are carrying 50 cases into a courtroom on any given day, the practical aspect of what it is that they're doing, it takes a lot to make sure that you explain to them. I just did it before I came here. What is when we're discussing a case, when we're dialoguing, we have this conversation a lot now. What is the right thing? What is the just thing? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And it takes time. It took me an hour to sit with one assistant prosecutor on one case to get to where we believed was the right thing to do. And if you replicate that times the 30-plus assistant prosecutors we have and the 4,000 and 5,000 cases that come through our agency every year, you can imagine the amount of intensity and the amount of time that it takes to go through a process like that. But it's a worthy process. As the professor indicated, I'm very proud of my career as an attorney because it was not a static career. I was an assistant prosecutor, and that's a great thing to be. I think it's one of the more admirable professions to have in the law. But I also went out and I got experience on the defense side of the criminal justice system. And I learned a lot in the 12 years that I represented clients, and I take that with me, the stresses and concerns and the talents that I learned in that particular area, so that I'm not like a one-trick pony, if it were, so that I have the other side, the full flavor of the criminal justice system. But I also, and the professor had mentioned this briefly, I was a civil rights litigator for the 12 years that I was also in private practice. And I particularly handled cases that involved police misconduct, issues like false arrest, malicious prosecution, police brutality. And I got into that area in a very odd way. I got into it because I was actually defending somebody who I truly believed in my heart was innocent of the crime they committed. Now, our system's skewed in a certain way. The prosecutor's job is always to do the right thing. It's always to do justice. That concept is not as easy as people would make it sound. I can tell you from being in this position for 2.5 years that when you look at a case like a homicide case, whether it be a death by auto, some person's view of what justice is will really pretty much depend on what side of that homicide you're on. Are you on the defendant's side and coming up with the explanations as to why it is that they did it and the excuses and mitigating factors, as we call them in the law, as to why they did it? Or are you on the victim's side of the family, which no matter what you did, no matter what you do, even if the fullest extent of the law came to bear upon that particular person, will never be enough? And so somewhere in the middle, the prosecutor has to make this evaluation. And interestingly enough, if you look at an indictment that's issued by a grand jury, which is what we deal with, it never says at the top of that indictment the name of the person or the name of the victim versus the defendant. It never says victim X versus the defendant. It says the state of New Jersey versus the defendant. And if you were inclined, which you're not probably, or you were curious as to why that is, the reason for that is because they want an independent person, not somebody that's filled with passion, understandable passion in many situations, or bias or prejudice, hopefully, that they're the ones that are going to make the ultimate decision as to what the right or wrong thing to do. In other words, that we don't have prosecutions by mob mentality, by public opinion polls, by the sway of what people think is the right thing or wrong thing, that we make these decisions based upon a set of facts and the legal principles and the Constitution that apply to those facts. And it's not easy because many people have varying views. And oftentimes the prosecutor's offices become a little bit of a punching bag, if you will, because you're never going to get it 100% right based upon the public opinion as to what the right or wrong thing to do is. You can look in your own lives in terms of what you think the right or wrong thing to do is, and you can see virtually every topic on morality or ethics will eventually come down to a debate between good-hearted and good-minded and intellectual people that have differing opinions. So many times I'm in the fortunate position as a defense lawyer, you don't have to be concerned about any of that. As a defense lawyer, your mantra is not to do justice. Your mantra is to protect the rights of your client and to make sure that somebody like me, in my capacity now as prosecutor, does their job. And I welcome that all the time because without a defense bar and without defense attorneys to be able to challenge our evidence, things can happen that can lead to unsuccessful and unpalatable results that range from everywhere from sloppy prosecutions, sloppy investigations, to perhaps politically motivated and prosecutions that are occurring for the wrong reasons. The defense bar is the check and balance, if you will, that somebody like me does not have unfettered discretion to do whatever it is. Now, of course, we try to do that ourselves. And the judges, of course, obviously, they look at it in terms of listening to the two maniacs usually at a trial going at it, the defense bar screaming, the prosecutor screaming, and some poor, I used to remember a judge I used to appear before, he was a very gentle man when I was a young assistant prosecutor, and I had a very aggressive public defender, and he literally looked like he was watching a tennis match between us, you know, arguing with one another, going back and forth. But ultimately, they're left with a very heavy responsibility. See, we advocate. We advocate a position. We advocate a position we believe to be true. And some people can look at this as very strange. When I left being a prosecutor and became a defense lawyer, many people asked me this question, which I thought was so, in today's society, unbelievable. Well, what's it like to represent these people? And how do you feel about yourself now that you're wearing the black hat as opposed to the white hat? And I thought that this was, usually many of those people, by the way, came to my office later on because they got themselves in trouble. And it was amazing how they looked at it differently, when they were the individuals that got themselves into some sort of legal skirmish. The bottom line is that the public's perception about what it is that we do is usually pretty skewed in terms of the real day-to-day activities that are going on inside of a courtroom. These kind of dialogues are happening in terms of what the just and right thing to do, but the defense lawyer is certainly there to make sure that we don't do anything that's inappropriate, and certainly would bring that forward, and the judge would have to make the call. So I come with that interesting, when I did police practices background, it really started as a criminal defense lawyer, and I was representing an individual that I believe was falsely arrested. And let me tell you, as a defense lawyer, I don't care whether the person committed the crime or didn't commit the crime. People found that to be very unpalatable as well. Well, how could you not care? Well, there have been too many mistakes that have been made in society for the many ages of recorded history, where people automatically made an assumption that somebody was guilty of something, or guilty of something that's really up here when really it was down here. And because defense lawyers began to not defend their clients with the vigor that they should, mistakes got made. Mistakes got made. And this is not a place where you want to make mistakes. Mistakes happen. It's a human institution. There's a lot of moving parts to it. You want to limit those mistakes as much as possible and as completely as possible, because those mistakes have dramatic consequences, either to the victims and or the defendants. And so while I was representing this individual, we tried this case, and he was found not guilty. And he asked me if I would file a civil rights lawsuit against the police agency. I knew nothing about civil rights law, and in fact tried to tell him I wouldn't do it. But he felt comfortable with me, and he said, it's either you or I won't go to anybody else. And so I went into this case kind of in shock about the police practices that were going on within that police agency. By looking at their internal affairs records, which is really the safeguard of a community. And any officer in a department knows that an effective internal affairs department is key to creating the correct culture with a police agency. There is nothing in opposite or contradictory with the idea of effective and aggressive law enforcement, but that law enforcement and that aggressiveness is tempered with the law and the Constitution. There's nothing in opposite about that. But in this police agency, this individual had something close to 68 internal affairs matters that had been filed against him. That's a whopping number. And they were all for the same thing over and over again. Off-duty related incidents, pistol whippings, shootings of not only just citizens, but police officers as well that were off-duty. And one time after another, it was a pass and a pass and a pass. Well, ultimately, we prevailed in that civil rights litigation, and because that got reported in the media, all of a sudden my practice took this crazy turn into like these people calling me up to ask me to handle civil rights cases for them. And I found it to be a fascinating and challenging area of the law. It's very intense. It's usually handled both federal law, state law, it's involved in it. But that unique perspective, when I became prosecutor, I've drawn on many, many, many times. Because as the professor said, one of my responsibilities as prosecutor is maintaining and managing the law enforcement community in Morris County. And in case you don't know, for those of you who come from Morris County, it's a little bit of a daunting task because we're talking about redundancy and we're talking about shared services and things that are going on in government right now. We have 39 municipalities in Morris County and 44 law enforcement agencies. That's a tremendous amount of chiefs and individuals that it's my responsibility to make sure that I bring them into a collective whole so that we can work in a uniform, coordinated, and constitutionally appropriate way. One thing that I can tell you as an aside from Morris County's point of view is I'm not from Morris County. I moved here 5 years ago. I grew up principally in Essex County. I grew up in a town that reminds me very much of the town that I live in right now, but a town that eventually became overridden by crime. There's our other side of the equation, right? A town where my wife was afraid to walk on the street at night, and one of the precipitous reasons why we left that town was when she indicated that she no longer felt safe walking on the street at night, and she just wanted to get out. And in fact, I had even asked my realtor when I was looking in Morris County to find me a place like my hometown 40 years ago. And she said, you know what, you gotta move to this town. And she was right, she hit it right on the money. But wasn't that sad? A beautiful, suburban community that just became a playground for those who would perpetrate criminal acts upon the citizens of that town and completely diminish the quality of life. And I don't think I have to tell the intellectual capital in this room what happens when a town is ravaged by crime. Businesses fly out the door, the social impact of people leaving the community shortly makes it, in some instances, a very bad place to live. So one of the things that come with that perspective in my mind is not only the civil rights background and effective law enforcement and constitutional law enforcement, but my other hat that I wear is, what am I going to do to make sure that the communities in Morris County don't become like the community that I came from? And one of those things is to be proactive. One of the things that the professor had tasked me to discuss with you are some of the innovative programs that I'm very proud we have instituted since I became prosecutor that were not in existence before in the county, and for the most part, probably not in existence in any county in the state. One of the first ones, something that you would think is kind of common sense, but we did not have in Morris County, was the Community Affairs Unit. Well, that's a strange, I'll tell you, the law enforcement community kind of looked at that as, I think they were calling it things like the Lollipop Club, and they were laughing about, why is the first thing this guy is doing is starting a community affairs unit? Well, I think it was very important that I come out to the community to explain what it is that we do, to put a face on the office, to meet the faith-based communities, to meet the ethnic communities, to meet the education community, to interact in a way that lets them know that we are partners really in the same task. And that task is to make sure that we keep our communities safe, keep our children safe, and that we make sure that we have a place that we can flourish in. So why would the Community Affairs Unit, many people say, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, we started that unit in conjunction with another unit that we called the Intelligence Crime Task Force. The Intelligence Crime Task Force was a novel, intelligence-led, cutting-edge law enforcement task force that essentially is what it says. It was the gathering and gaining of intelligence and the prioritizing of criminals in the county so that we could use that intelligence to proactively pursue those who were committing crimes. These were specifically gangs, drugs, guns, violent crimes, and burglaries. I was asked to talk a little bit about crime trends. Burglaries are a big crime trend in this county. Okay, we have a big problem with it. We also have a gang presence in the county. I think that I was able to bring a unique perspective coming from a little bit more of an urban county to explain that a lot of times burglaries are not disassociated with gangs, that there is sometimes an interconnection. I've represented gang members. I know who they are, how they speak, how they talk, how they go about doing the things that they do. I've prosecuted gang members as an assistant prosecutor. I know the field. And one of the things about them is that they go to places that are wealthy, places that are nice, because they have nice things. And that's what they're looking to get. Some people have an image of the gang situation as guys out there wearing their colors and they got guns and they're shooting up the community, the image that's presented to you in the media. And that may be true in some places. But in the suburban community, it's a little more under the radar screen. It's people that are affiliated with these gangs that are going out and many times committing these kinds of property crimes. So in the Intelligence Crime Task Force, we actually started within that unit a burglary crime task force. And some people may say, well, what is that? It sounds obvious, like you're using intelligence. What we're doing is we're working closely with our local police agencies like never before. And we're not only just getting information, we now have analysts. One of the other areas we were talking about was technology. We have brought analysts in, computer programs, computer mapping. We, in our outreach community with the community affairs, you'll start seeing how these are interconnected with one another, have reached out to the business community. So I'll give you an example. We work with jewelry stores and pawn shops. We tell them when there's a burglary that's been committed. We quickly get an identification of that jewelry. And we basically say to them, if this comes across your desk, please let us know. Now that may sound like an obvious thing, but that was never being done before. We have made hundreds of arrests on people that have committed burglaries and are trying to fence the property simply based upon that relationship alone. It was never done before. And if you can imagine how many times a person commits a burglary before they get caught, 20, 30 times before they get caught, and you multiply that times a couple of hundred people getting arrested, you can understand why Morris County is in a unique position that when crime has trended up, if you're following this kind of thing, we were lucky enough in the last evaluation to get a 5% decrease, the second largest decrease in the entire state. Now, crime trends can move up. Statistics are sometimes deceptive, But what we were looking at is in what categories are these crimes being reduced in. And they were all being reduced in the intelligence-led policing effort that we're finding, that we're actually attacking. Another one, if you guys from Morris County, you may realize we just recently sentenced an individual to a 30-year state prison sentence with 13 and a half years of parole and eligibility that was involved in a gun and drug operation. That's a huge number in the criminal justice system. People that commit murders in other counties sometimes do not get these kind of numbers. Now, that was one of what we're calling our self-selecting targets, an individual who has identified themselves through our intelligence of being an individual who are committing many crimes of violence in Morris County. And as a result of targeting that individual and doing our investigation, we found about 9 other associates that individual was involved with. And that led to 3 separate operations that in 1 year seized more drugs, guns, and arrested more people that were involved with gang-related issues than in the past 5 or 10 years combined in Morris County, all from sharing information with one another. I was telling the professor I had the opportunity to bring the freeholders up to the room to show them the amount of drugs and the guns that were seized in these operations. And I think that literally, to be honest with you, I could tell by the looks on their face they were in shock. This could be in Morris County? Well, that's what I'm trying to educate the people. That is the damning thought. That is the danger zone. That is that thought process that this is happening here is exactly where my old community was when they had their blinders on and are now at a point right now where they're, pushing against something that is just a never-ending tide of problems. Okay, so our job also, as you can see, is to interface with the community and to be able to build intelligence in order to proactively go after those individuals. What many people don't know about those operations, though, where did we get that intelligence from? The fact of the matter is we got the intelligence that led to the beginning of that operation, that led to the prolific seizure of all that stuff, from people that we had met at our community affairs events and from one of the mayors of one of the towns. Is this really tinny here, or should I put this down? Or yeah? Okay. When we got that information, and when the elected official actually called us, and we had talked to somebody who we had just met at a community affairs event that said, you told us that we could call you if we have a problem in our community. We have a problem in our community, and here's where it is, and this is what they're doing. And then the mayor called in with the same, information. We were like, that's interesting. We have intersecting, information at this point in time. And then we went out and we did the traditional law enforcement techniques that would be done in order to confirm that information. The bottom line to that whole long-winded part of what it is we did with those operations is that after September 11th, I think we all recognize that we're all in this together as partners. I recently had an event at the police academy where every elected official and every appointed official in every town in Morris County was invited to attend so that we could talk to them about our new intelligence-led policing model and so that those elected officials would understand what I was asking their local police agencies to do while they were working with us. No longer in a scattered approach, no longer in a siloed approach where each town felt that crime problems only came and existed within their borders and they weren't concerned about anywhere else. It's taken 2 years to try to educate even the law enforcement community that many of the crimes that are being committed in their own communities are from people that don't even live in their own communities. That the criminals don't have geographic boundaries, we can't have geographic boundaries. And that we need to be able to have a dialogue with one another going back and forth to share our intelligence sources so that we can make a proactive approach at these individuals. And the police community has been very, very, very good and been doing a great job with that. But I felt it was important also to let the elected officials know, because they're the ones that are going to be querying their police agencies. Why are you doing this? How come you're going outside of my particular town and working on this investigation over here? I would listen to the elected officials that would ask these questions of me, and it was kind of surprising to me that right across the hall from the mayor is the police chief, and nobody was talking to one another. Okay, and anyone who's been in elected office knows what I'm talking about. So we brought everybody together in an attempt to kick off a new program that we're going to be doing so that the elected officials had an understanding of what it was we were doing. So that is on the side of the equation that the professor talked about with the courtroom. I was very fortunate, depending on how you look at it, not only to get this job, but when I came to Morris County, I was a little surprised about one thing. We had a backlog of trial prosecutions that could choke a horse. I could not believe it. We had homicide cases, some of which were up to 8 and 9 years old. People waiting in jail for their right to their day in court. I was even arguing their side of the equation. We need to try these cases. We need to unclog this system. And I'm proud to say that with the Eugene Bound case, which was the case where the individual was just convicted on all counts of running over the 2 girls in Kinnelon, represented the last of those backlog cases. In 2.5 years wasn't easy. Our assistant prosecutors and our detectives worked on those cases, tried 7 of them within the past 1.5 years to successful conclusion. And I'm very proud of the fact that we have now a statewide reputation of being a training prosecutor's office, of being a prosecutor's office that walks into court and tries cases. Here's a fair and reasonable plea offer. You don't want it. We want to try the cases, of course, resources of the court permitting, and which is a problem. We talk about resources in terms of having the courts there to be able to try the cases that we're prepared on. So I know the professor wants me to answer a lot of questions, and that in a thumbnail sketch is what it is that we've been doing here at the prosecutor's office. For any of you students that are out there that are interested in a career in law enforcement, you should know we have many disciplines working in the prosecutor's office, and we work with a lot of interns, some probably from the school. In terms of, we have lawyers that are assistant prosecutors that present the cases in court. We have detectives that actually work with the local police agencies, but also do their own kind of investigations with the gangs, drugs, guns, major crimes, sex crimes, domestic violence, a very big detective staff that handles that. But we also have a support staff in the office that is essential to the functioning and running of our office, with individuals that do everything from counseling service to individuals who are victims of crime, that work in our victim witness unit, and to clerical people and the people that really, as you all know, that work in your businesses, that without them, there would be no way that the prosecutors and detectives would be able to do their job. So you're always welcome, of course, to send your qualified individuals to our office. The internship program is a very powerful and prolific one. In fact, most of the kids, there are many kids that volunteer their time even after the internship program, which is something obviously we welcome, especially in a time where we're concerned about using our resources in an appropriate way. Now, I hope that answers some of the basic questions that you were asking, Professor, but I really would love to answer some of your questions. Yes, ma'am.
When you mentioned the incident where the mayor called you and the individual called you, why was, say, the individual not talking to the police department? And why was the mayor, I mean, I think if I knew something, I'd be calling the police.
Yeah, I think that you should. We work so closely with the police agencies, that's fine. The question was, why was it that the mayor and that individual that I talked to about those investigations felt comfortable calling me as opposed to calling their police chief? Well, one of the things I think, which is an important thing, was I happened to be there at the right time. I happened to be at a function where we were having a community affairs event, and I was telling people that we all need to be our eyes and ears, and we all need to work together. I was telling them, law enforcement can't be everywhere. For those in the community that think that we have all of these resources and we can just omnipotently know what's happening, and that just like CIS, that the case is going to be solved, tried, and convicted within 30 minutes, it's not that way. We need you. And I was having that speech, and I think that maybe resonating that in her mind, the person decided to give me a call, and then the mayor decided to follow up. I didn't ask them, to be honest with you, why it was they didn't talk to their chief, because they felt comfortable calling me, and I wasn't going to push them off doing that. Why would it be that a person would call me as opposed to their chief? I don't know the answer to that, why people would do something like that. And I wouldn't ask because I wouldn't want them to feel uncomfortable. I mean, I think a lot of times it comes because, again, just like I said, I think because we were having that dialogue and we were literally talking about reach out to us or reach out to your police agency, she was just like, remember me from the blah, blah, blah. She met a person, a face to the office. And I think that maybe she felt comfortable having met me, which is a very important thing and one of the reasons why we come out and do. So maybe in a certain sense, the reason was exactly the reason why we do it. Because we're trying to meet them and make them feel comfortable, and they felt comfortable to call.
Prosecutor Bianchi, I have a question. I'm a faculty member, so I have to ask a more abstract, less practical question. And this particular question has to do with justice. You talked a lot about the role of your office and justice, and I found that reassuring that you worry about such things, that it's part of your work. But the question is, there are at least two broad images of justice you could be working with, right? One could involve a picture of justice coming out of a process, and that certainly seems to be some of what you're talking about. State versus Smith, state versus Peabody, I hope not. The basic idea is you have the prosecutor representing the state in an adversarial system, and the results of two highly motivated attorneys, highly motivated parties going after one another is supposed to be justice. That's a procedural picture. But you also suggested that a lot of your work is, I think you put it, as doing the right thing, which suggests there's more of an independent picture of what is just, what is right. So the question is, how do you reconcile those two things? If a defense attorney told his or her client, well, I'm going to represent you very energetically, but keep in mind that I've got to do the right thing, the defense client might say, well, you're not representing me fully in the adversarial system. How can the state, how can the community members not raise a similar charge with you in saying that your efforts to be their advocate, to be their representative, aren't going to be compromised by your interest in your own independent vision of what's right?
Well, that is, you just made me laugh, actually, when I'm just thinking of a world in the law where the defense attorney would be charged with the responsibility of representing him and saying, hey, but I'm going to do with the right thing. It would pretty much cripple the system. Because interestingly enough, if you talk to most defense lawyers, a lot of them are not going to have a problem with what the prosecution does. But to answer your question squarely, the way I justify it is that's what the law tells me to do. We are not sworn to get convictions. We are not sworn to just simply cookie cutter put people in prison. We're sworn to do justice. But as I indicated before, sometimes that can become a very fuzzy area as to what the right thing to do is. One of the first parameters that we would look at, of course, is, and I can answer what we typically do, is what does the law say for this set of facts, for these particular crimes, is the minimum and maximum term a person can spend. So that's usually a good starting point. The law specifically puts in the discretion within ranges as to what an appropriate plea offer or sentence by a court should be. Many times, absent areas of mandatory sentencing, there are some statutes that are mandatory sentencing where the judge has no discretion. But many times the judge has discretion, and so the same principle would apply to the judge that you're asking me rhetorically. How does the judge make the decision within the spectrum of, say, 5 years and 10 years as to what the appropriate sentence would be? And the answer to that is we look at what's called mitigating and aggravating factors. Mitigating and aggravating factors are in our 2C criminal code. They're too long to explain to you here. There are probably 10 or 15 or 20 of them on each side. An aggravating factor would be something that you would look at this particular crime and say it was especially aggravated or especially heinous or what have you as a result of these things, and they're spelled out there. The nature of the crime, the vulnerability of the victim, the age of the victim. There's various things that they would have there. Whether a person has a prior record or doesn't have a prior record, whether they're amenable to rehabilitation or not amenable to rehabilitation based upon the prior acts. And then on the other side of that scale, of that ledger, is the mitigating factors, circumstances that would tend to justify or excuse the defendant's behavior in this particular case, the likelihood that the person will respond positively to probationary treatment. There's a number of those. And so we kind of look at those. And I'll give you, to me, what I think are the really most complex areas to make this decision, this judgment call, are, and I say this to the young people who are out there for two reasons. One, so that you can hear my answer, and two, so that you can hear the problem. These DWI and under the influence fatality cases, to me, are the singular most complex decision-making process that I need to make. Many times, we all know about the evils of drinking and driving and being under the influence. And I recognize that the individual, 9 times out of 10 that did it, didn't do it obviously with the intent that somebody die as a result. Nevertheless, it is a crime. And nevertheless, a victim's family has been deprived of a loved one. And our job also in that aggravating factors that we talked about, mitigating factors, is deterrence, to make sure that this conduct is not repeated again. The criminal justice system sometimes makes a point in incarcerating individuals for circumstances such as this. But it's not beyond all of us that grapple with these cases, that we look at them and we say, wow, in the balance here, somebody's going to be going to jail for a very long time. And that's another tragedy, because we recognize that the individual never expected the outcome that had occurred, but drove so recklessly under the influence, nevertheless, that somebody died. And for the victim's family, where somebody died, no time is enough time. And to the mother, usually, and father of the child, or the young person who's going to jail, any time is too much time. They're very, very difficult analyses. So we look at some aggravating and mitigating factors. What does their record look like? What does their driving record look like? How intoxicated were they? What was the likelihood that their behavior on that day was likely to cause death or serious bodily injury resulting in death, which is the legal standard? And we work with the defense lawyers, point, counterpoint, and we try to come up with something that we believe is fair and equitable. I don't know if that answers directly your question, but one place where you don't want to be, just as the other alternative to that, is you want to have a defense bar that believes that you're listening to their concerns and at least you're evaluating what they're doing and that you're recognizing their mitigating factors and that you're taking them into consideration. But however, you don't want to have a system where, and in fact, the Supreme Court of the United States and the Supreme Court of New Jersey has struck down those sentencing provisions that say everyone must get this. Now, some people looked at that as being equality. Everyone gets the same sentence. But what the Supreme Court said was, after years and years of how that didn't work, was that no, you should be looking at the individual aggravating and mitigating circumstances and doing the tough calls. Because otherwise, some people who may have done something far less or for more justifiable reasons is going to be getting the same sentence that somebody would get that's got a worse record.
How about earlier in the process? What about when it comes to giving resources to different kinds of crimes? I mean, I assume your office, like most government offices, has limited resources.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so many hours, so many personnel you can throw at different kinds of crimes. So let's say you came in, or a hypothetical future prosecutor came in and said, I really think that the big problem for Morris County is going to be gang activity or some kind of internet fraud, whatever it might be, but a significant portion of the community is clamoring about something else. Those crazy kids in the college in Madison, I'm talking about Drew, of course, not FDU, and something needs to be done about them.
Right.
How do you reconcile that? How does your influence, how does your vision of justice shape the kinds of crimes that are prosecuted most actively?
Right, that's a great question. It takes a lot of work at being diligent at recognizing what the problem is, what's going on in the community. You would not believe, trust me when I tell you, the kinds of cases people want us to prosecute that call us in the office. And it ranges from funny to troublesome sometimes, that people think that, you know, they want certain things prosecuted, that if we were to do that, everybody would be in jail. But essentially what my vision was obviously my first and primary concern is violent crime. And to be able to use our resources to eradicate violent crime. Because to me, when we started the Intelligence Crime Task Force, the reason we did it was to take those resources that we already had, and instead of having everybody in all these separate units, to have them all as one combined whole to work on drugs, gangs, burglaries, and guns, all as one unit, not 4 separate units. Sharing all of that intelligence, because violent crime to me was one of our #1 concerns. Crimes against children. I mean, we wouldn't eliminate crimes against children, sex crimes, major crimes, any of those particular units. We have done nothing to actually limit any of the focus that the office had prior to me getting in. We've actually increased the focus towards the violent crime, but we've just done it by moving resources around in a way, in my opinion, that are better suited and more interconnected with one another, and that has led to some unbelievable results when you actually have people from detectives and lawyers from different disciplines now sitting down and looking at a case, as opposed to having been, you know, disjointed and in different units and not communicating with one another. But again, the focus to me is gangs, drugs, violent crime, burglaries, and with the stuff the Intelligence Crime Task Force is doing, in addition to those traditional areas that we were already covering.
Other questions?
Finite amount of resources which you'd like to direct toward violent crime and trying to reduce violent crime. What's your posture when it comes to victimless crime and spending resources on prostitution and marijuana use and such? Well, my position...
Can you repeat the question for the back?
He's talking about my emphasis is on, here's where you're going to hear a question, was, you know, there's always 2 sides to an argument, although I think an easy answer. If I'm spending all my resources on violent crime, what am I doing about things like prostitution and you know, marijuana possession, given the resources? Broken windows theory is essentially, if you guys have ever listened to that, if you allow those kinds of crimes to occur, then greater crimes are going to occur. My answer to that is that we had an example of what was going on with those kinds of prosecutions in the previous administrations to mine. The resource drain to our office was extraordinary in terms of bringing those cases for some reason in Superior Court, where you have to understand the legal structure before you can answer that question. people who are charged with third and fourth degree offenses in our criminal code, who have no prior record, are presumed not to go to jail. That's a presumption of non-incarceration. I didn't make that law up. I didn't write the law. That's the law that the legislature and the Supreme Court has followed. Persons with first and second degree crimes, however, the presumption of incarceration is just the opposite. There's a presumption of incarceration. So many of the cases that you're referring to, I don't minimize the need for enforcement of those particular areas, but for a prosecutor's office that is supposed to be dealing with more serious crimes that have, with all due respect, a greater impact on society, my opinion is that we should be concentrating on those areas, and the local police agencies should be concentrating on the areas that you mentioned. Now, we have offered many police agencies, and I'll tell you where it's a benefit to me. Here's all about making your resources work for you, or us, all of us. We have many young detectives in our agency, many who would love to go do a surveillance, many who would love to go out and do a proactive investigation, and we offer those services to the local police agencies all the time. If you're doing an investigation, such as something with prostitution, say, for example, as you may know, our office has in fact been involved with them. We send people out because it's a good training ground for our younger detectives who are interfacing with our attorneys, and they're able to get out and get some experience. But in terms of prioritizing those cases, you have to understand, sir, when I came into office, we had 10 homicides that were 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 years old, and had not, well, they needed to be prosecuted, and they unfortunately also needed to be continued investigation that went on with those cases. If I were given an option of putting my resources towards prosecuting, those cases, or you may recently remember the Father Hines homicide in Chatham, I had to take a number of detectives and assistant prosecutors, even though we solved the case within 24 hours. That process does not end with an arrest. There's a huge amount of work that goes on between there and the trial prosecution. I would be, I think, remiss if I were to dedicate resources to an area that I don't think our office should be dealing with, while at the same token take away from a case such as that. So my answer to that is we have to work cooperatively with the local. I've asked the local officials to work cooperatively with us on our larger investigations, not as a task force, but to me it's important they be part of the process, that they don't feel that the prosecutor's office or the big shots that come in when only there's a big case, that they get to work in the surveillances, that they get to work with the intelligence. There are main intelligence gatherers, they're local police agencies, that they work on those investigations. And the quid pro quo to that is that if they have something that's a problem in their community, and when they do, they call, we come up with a solution, we sit down, we talk about how to eradicate it, what the legal issues are, and how we would go about the investigative model. But I wouldn't say that I would necessarily sweep up that investigation in my own agency, exclude them, and prosecute those cases.
We have another question over here by the big stone column.
I read recently that you were asking local sheriffs and other law enforcement to put together top 10 lists, most worst of the worst, I think was the quote that I read.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to know more details about what you were hoping to achieve, and answer any questions as to would that maybe unfairly profile something?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you for asking that, because this is the hardest part about my job. It was a 4-hour seminar and 2 hours on the phone with the media. I can't help what they print. But what can I tell you? It's funny, when we were in a conversation with one of the reporters, and we went through what the program really is, and in the middle of that, he said, well, how is all that data being compiled? And he says, we make a list of it. Immediately, without missing a beat, he said, a list? And we're like, wait a second. This isn't like we're making lists of people we don't like and that we're, going after them. But sure enough, there was the, list being made of people and all of these routes. Of course, I understand when people read the article, I was a little miffed about it, because I'm like, it gives a wrong impression. Here's what the program is. There's nothing that was different with the program that has not been done traditionally with law enforcement. As this gentleman, we're just answering this gentleman's question here. Law enforcement gets intelligence, many times through confidential informants, cooperating witnesses, or even from individuals who were just arrested that want to help themselves out. There's nothing novel about this. There's nothing that's unique about this. Well, the problem that we were having was that many times we would resolve a case in the county level, and one of the chiefs would call and say, do you know that guy's like our #1 burglar? And well, no, we didn't know that. Why didn't somebody call us and tell us that before we resolved the case? And you can repeat the story over and over again. So what this list, which is not a list, is, and what this program was that they were talking about, was that we are going to information share We were talking about not having silos of information. It is taking your traditional intelligence that law enforcement has gathered and Supreme Courts have said is perfectly acceptable, and it's merely pushing that data to the prosecutor's office, and us taking our data that we have, which is independent, and adding it to their data and pushing it back to the local police agency so that each one is on the same page as to what all of their intelligence is. It's intelligence sharing and gathering. Now, the quote-unquote list that they're referring to is that we asked the municipal agencies to give us all of that intelligence information, and once they did, we were going to do what we did with those other operations that I talked to you about where we got all those guns, drugs, gang members, and whatever. We were going to prioritize the most serious of those offenders, the ones who implicate the greatest violent crime potential in the county. And we're going to evaluate how the local agency got that information. Of course, if it were in an inappropriate or illegal manner, it will obviously be dealt with. Not to mention the fact, which is also not mentioned in the article, that all of the information that we will be using with the individuals that we have targeted, we call them self-selecting targets, I'll explain that in a second, is all in the discovery that's provided to the defense attorney. Here's how we got it, here's how this individual became a target that we went after, and here's what we did to make the arrest. So all that we're doing is now what we call self-selecting targets. What we mean by self-selecting is that these aren't individuals that we went out to find. These were individuals that we have, through traditional law enforcement means, determined have been involved in either guns, drugs, gangs, violent crime, or burglaries in Morris County. And we did that based upon traditional law enforcement means. Then, when we got that information, here is what the program was about. None of this got reported, which is so unfortunate that we have to deal with this. All the stuff I'm telling you about right now, that's easy stuff. That's nothing that's unique, okay? Us doing it in a countywide basis is unique. And we're getting teams of individuals from the local police agencies and the county prosecutor's office and the sheriff's office. And when we come up with those target packages, we call them, of those individuals, we are going to proactively do investigations like every other investigation would be done. But instead of doing it in an isolated, siloed way where one agency is doing it, we're all working together in doing it so that we can build more and more intelligence. So the novelty of the program, and just so you know, because you can tell I'm obviously agitated about the manner in which it was reported, this program was the very same program that the Attorney General's office, which was reported about all over the place, pushed to the county prosecutor's offices to do about 2 years ago. Give us your main people, your main targets, players, and we're going to work in you guys, we're going to monitor you to see how you do with those people. They're going to monitor. So we would go to these meetings and they would say, where are you with that investigation? And how far are you with it? And what's going on with it? The novelty of this program is that we did the same exact model, but pushed it to the local police agencies. In other words, you tell us the same information at the Attorney General. The difference is we're actually working with them on the investigation with a team of lawyers and a team of detectives to be able to proactively surveil and do the other law enforcement techniques that we would do to see whether or not the information is valid, is confirmed, and if it is, to arrest them. And I don't think that there's a person, sometimes you get queried, and understandably so, because of the manner in which articles are written. And there was another issue that I had dealt with, and when there was an advocate against something I was doing, I said to them, let me just ask you one question. I respect your opinion. But would you, if you were in the same situation that the victim was in this case, expect me to do anything different if it was your little girl that was raped? It happened to be a rape case. And she paused, and I said, because if you answer the question, there's only two responses I'm going to have. Either you tell, three responses, the truth, or that you're either a liar or you're crazy. Because anyone that would say that we should not aggressively prosecute something within the bounds of the Constitution to protect a 10-year-old from being raped. It was an instance where you may have heard, where the guy was allowed to leave the country and not be prosecuted. And I took measures to make sure that would never happen again. And so that person understandably had a position that they didn't think that that was a right thing. The Supreme Court ultimately said it was, 7-0 was a correct way to go about it. But honestly, I would ask this question. Would you, if it was your little girl that was raped, tell me you would have no problem if she got on a plane and got deported, and the defendant got on a plane, got deported, would never have to be prosecuted again? Come on. I'm sorry, but that's a little sidebar there. Does that answer your question, though?
We'll take one more question.
Good, thank you.
We actually had a faculty member in here last week discuss how forensic evidence is ineffective and often, in a lot of cases, leads to over 10,000 to 20,000 false convictions a year. And his solution to that was that defense should have a right to forensic investigation independent of the police force. Since you've seen both sides, defense and prosecution, I wasn't sure what your thoughts on that would be. If the defense in violent matters had the right to a forensic investigation independent of the police.
They do. I think there's larger issues to that than that. I'm sorry.
I think he's asking whether they have a right to a subsidized investigation.
Well, I was just going to say, the real issue to that question is, do they have the resources to be able to do it? And look, my point of view on this is that I have no problem if anybody wants to test our case, our evidence. It should be that way. Mistakes can be made. There's no greater mistake, and believe me, I don't think there's a prosecutor, and if there is, they shouldn't have the job, that would feel comfortable with the concept that there was a conviction of a person that was ultimately innocent of a crime. That's the worst of the worst things that could possibly happen. But public defenders, for example, when I was a defense lawyer, I would apply to the public defender's office if my client didn't have the resources to get subsidized to have either an investigator or to have an expert come in. And I don't think I ever had a request that was turned down. I had to demonstrate a need. I had to demonstrate that they didn't have the money to be able to afford it. And many times they picked it up. But I have no problem with the concept that, look, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If we're allowed to test it and we're allowed to look at it, I don't see any reason why the defense shouldn't be able to do that.